Actually, I sold my house. Oh,
My brother-in-law revealed, shocking both my husband and me. The most stunned was my mother-in-law.
Why on earth would you do that?
But she's supposed to pick me up? She demanded, clearly upset. Trying to soothe her, my brother-in-law replied, calm down, and started explaining his reasons. I'm Maple. My husband Hart and I both work from home. We're content with the laid-back work environment, enjoying breaks whenever we like. Then, Hart's mom moved in with us. We were financially comfortable, so it wasn't a big issue. But why don't you two go out to work?
My mother-in-law would question us with a critical look.
Hearing this, I felt a wave of frustration, thinking here we go again. We had already explained to her about our work-from-home situation when she first asked. But then, aren't you just playing around? I'm telling Hart too. Are you listening? When will you start working properly? Aren't you thinking about your future life?
My mother-in-law said, refusing to understand our work. I'm worried. Was it a mistake to come to this house? Maybe I should have gone to Kyle's place. She often lamented this way.
Kyle, Hart's brother, apparently found a wealthy spouse named Jane and now seems to be living off her wealth.
My mother-in-law doesn't know about this.
My brother-in-law had asked us not to tell her.
Kyle's house, it's not like the small one. It's huge, like a castle in a foreign land. Well, eventually, I'll move to Kyle's house, and it will become my home. She said so, and she's been waiting for him to come and get her.
My husband and I knew that day would never come. Once, my husband had reached out to Kyle, who's adored by my mother-in-law, suggesting they live together. But Kyle refused to have her move in with him. So, we ended up living together. And even if we are called unemployed for working from home, we've accepted that's just the way she is. But then, something happened that changed everything. Suddenly, we got a call from my brother-in-law.
I'm coming over this weekend. He didn't wait for our response and hung up.
What should we do? That guy never changes. Always doing things his way. He said, it made both of us puzzled.
Overhearing our conversation, my mother-in-law excitedly leaned in.
He's coming to pick me up. Help me prepare for the move, please. My mother-in-law said this and dragged my husband into her room.
He looked at her with a complicated expression and said, Mom, he doesn't mean to come for you. He must have contacted us because something happened.
But she snorted in disbelief. That can't be true.
But he didn't say anything about picking you up on the phone, did he? He just hasn't said it yet. I'm so done with this house. You want to treat me like a maid, but I won't let that happen.
We couldn't understand why she was having such delusions. Since moving in with us, she had been waking up at her leisure, not doing any housework, and receiving an allowance. Well, we had no intention of possibly keeping my mother-in-law, so we packed her things and waited for my brother-in-law to arrive. On the weekend, my brother-in-law and his wife came to our house. As soon as they arrived, they had this overly ingratiating look on their faces. I had a bad feeling about this. Then, my mother-in-law came out with her eyes shining.
You finally came. Listen, Maple can't do any housework at all, so I have to do everything X and Z, and Hart just ignores me. Isn't that terrible?
So we have to do everything, and Hart just ignores me. Isn't that terrible? So playing the victim, she said so, pushed past my husband, and welcomed my brother-in-law into the house.
Don't she turn? Party bro. I'm Zesty Ramos.
That's not true. We give her an allowance, and she eats whatever she wants. Plus, Maple does all the housework.
My husband replied with a complex expression, but my brother-in-law just looked skeptical.
You've been oblivious, big bro. Lately you've been neglecting Mom without realizing it, and Maple doesn't seem like the type to be considerate.
That's right. Kyle really understands me.
Hearing this conversation, both my husband and I frowned in annoyance. Still, since they had come, we decided to invite my brother-in-law and his wife into the living room. We all sat around the living room table, with my husband and me on one side, and my brother-in-law and his wife on the opposite.
Come on, what are you sitting around for? And make some tea.
Hey, I thought you were going to make it, mother-in-law.
What are you talking about? Making an old lady work? You see, Kyle, this is how Maple is.
My mother-in-law said this, and even pretended to cry. I was so exasperated by her behavior that I didn't even feel like arguing. After I served the tea, my brother-in-law and his wife became somber.
Actually, I sold my house. Absurd.
My brother-in-law revealed, leaving both my husband and me in shock and disbelief. The most shocked of all was my mother-in-law.
Why would you do such a thing? Aren't you coming to pick me up?
She confronted him, visibly shaken. My brother-in-law tried to calm her down, saying now and began to explain his reasons.
Actually, I ended up in debt and sold the house to pay it off. However, I'm broke now and have nowhere to live, so I thought we could stay with you guys and wanted to discuss it.
Hey, Dad?
I was trying to start a business, but it failed. Bills and Ray!
My brother-in-law said this nonchalantly with a laugh. My husband and I sighed in disbelief.
Just until we find a new place. Please. You're the only one we can turn to.
My brother-in-law and his wife both bowed their heads. I think we both had complicated expressions on our faces. But with no place to live, we had no choice. We allowed my brother-in-law and his wife to temporarily stay in our house. However, we made them promise to leave in a month. My brother-in-law, still laughing carelessly, said I understand, and left to prepare to send their belongings. After they left, my mother-in-law sat silently, appearing deep in thought. My husband and I thought she was just shocked. The next day, my brother-in-law and his wife's belongings arrived.
So many belongings. Where should we put them?
It's a problem. Maybe they'll have to sell some or rent a storage locker.
As we moved my brother-in-law's stuff, my husband and I said, without helping us, my mother-in-law suddenly made an outrageous suggestion.
I've been thinking, with Kyle here, I'll have a secure future, right? So, can you freeloaders move out?
My husband and I were shocked by her sudden words.
If you insist, Hart can stay.
But a wife who can't do anything is unnecessary. Get a divorce. That way, we can use the space where Maple was for all these belongings, right? My mother-in-law, her eyes sparkling, looked to my husband for agreement. He was just as exasperated as always, saying, "What are you talking about?" Right then, my brother-in-law and his wife arrived. My mother-in-law happily welcomed my brother-in-law, though I was still upset by her earlier words. My husband set that aside for the moment and confronted my brother-in-law about the luggage.
Please, Ria. We need to do something about these. There's too many. Either rent a locker or sell some to reduce the number, he said.
To this, my brother-in-law just stared at my husband and retorted, "Huh? What are you talking about? These are important belongings. I can't just sell them. And what if someone steals them from a locker? What if they get damaged? Will you take responsibility, bro?" My husband just shook his head in disbelief at my brother-in-law's unreasonable behavior.
This is our house. It's only natural that you show some consideration. If you don't like it, find a place quickly and move out.
Then my mother-in-law shouted, "What are you saying?"
I told you, if you don't like Kyle and his wife, you two leave. You're just freeloaders, unnecessary in this house.
Kyle is trying to start a business, while you two are just lazing around at home, calling it work from home. That's just a nuisance.
My mother-in-law spoke as if it was her own house.
My husband and I looked at each other and were stunned. My brother-in-law and his wife, initially surprised by my mother-in-law's words, began to smirk and said, "That might be a good idea. It's a hassle to look for a place, so we might as well live here."
That might be a good idea, son. It's a hassle to look for a place. Sure, but pun. Oh, we might as well live here. So sell us this house. Just I take us down.
I still find it uncomfortable living with my brother-in-law. Oh, this would be a relief.
"Please sell this house to us." Jane added, "Since mother-in-law agrees, please sell this house to us." Jane added, My husband and I were dumbfounded by their words. Before my husband could finish, my mother-in-law interrupted with a triumphant tone.
See, Kyle and Jane are saying this too. What will you do, Hart? If you're getting a divorce, you can stay here.
My mother-in-law glared at me triumphantly. I was about to retort, but my husband, who was sitting next to me, spoke up first.
I'm gonna say whatever you want, but we will have to leave. He raised his voice and his face is turning red with anger.
Don't yell like that. It's better without a deadbeat around. My mother-in-law shot back. My husband, however, replied in a disgusted tone.
Dude, you understand anything? This house belongs to my wife.
My husband's words left my mother-in-law and brother-in-law's family stunned. He continued, addressing them firmly.
This house was bought by Maple for our life together.
What are you talking about? Isn't it the husband who's supposed to buy the house?
There's no such rule. Besides, Maple is the one providing for Mom's allowance and living expenses.
Mom's pension is small, and Maple offered to cover it because it wouldn't be enough for her to live freely. My husband glared at my mother-in-law with a fierce expression. Despite this, my mother-in-law, seemingly in disbelief, sneered at me, saying surely not.
I can't believe it. Maple just plays on the computer all day and doesn't do proper housework. And her giving me an allowance from her money. Obscations doctors. She must be using my pension for it. Besides, my mother-in-law continued. It's Maple who's been managing my pension, right? You might tell Hart otherwise, but I'm sure it's coming from my pension. She glared at me with confidence.
I met her gaze unflinchingly.
That's the truth. I am the truth. I have succeeded as a self-employed business owner. With
Lies. A lying wife like you should just get a divorce.
You should live here with me and Kyle. Plus, there's no proof that Maple is earning anything.
earnings I said showed my mother-in-law my pay stub.
My mother-in-law and my brother-in-law's family widened their eyes in surprise upon seeing it. Mom's pension hasn't been touched since you came to live here. Maple has been managing it so Mom can live independently if she ever wants to leave. Despite that, Mom has been exploiting Maple, interrupting her work. The nuisance here is Mom. If you don't like Maple, then you should leave right now.
I don't believe this.
I don't mind if Kyle and your family stay temporarily, but you should at least show some patience.
We didn't want you two to live here. You two begged to stay. So we just agreed to it. My husband said this, glaring at my brother-in-law's family. My brother-in-law and his wife, usually not used to my husband raising his voice, started sweating nervously.
Don't you ain't Jack math nothing. Blow, you're earning so much. I wish you could teach me some business tips. Huh, Jane?
Yeah, I was really anxious about living with my sister-in-law, but she seems like a nice person.
Jane added, smiling with her husband. However, my mother-in-law remained unyielding.
First, don't act so high and mighty. Evildoers. That's just a bunch of meats. Hart, you should leave the house too. Go out and see the harshness of the world for yourself.
She said this and refused to listen to anything else we said. My husband and I, exasperated, interrupted her.
Well then, we'll pack our things and move to a new house.
You'll have to pay the mortgage for this house, but that's fine, right? Don't come crying to us for help later.
If mother-in-law insists, and since Hart is saying this, we'll leave.
It'll be hard to live as before with just a pension, but we have no choice, do we? At this, my mother-in-law shouted, red-faced with anger, "Get out!"
Hey, you're kidding, right? There's no need to do that.
It's our trial with Mike down. It's safe with you guys here.
His wife added, trying to stop us, but my mother-in-law glared at us fiercely, saying, "Don't talk to them."
Kyle, you're going to be a CEO, right? Use my pension if you need to. Just hurry up and start your business.
Show them what happens when they defy us. My mother-in-law made her stand decisively. Hearing her words, we decided to leave and no longer involve ourselves with her or my brother-in-law's family. Of course, the mortgage on the house still remained, but we had transferred it to my brother's name. Time passed since that incident. Despite some lingering dissatisfaction, being free from my mother-in-law's spite, we resumed our life at our own. One day, while working from home in our new apartment, my mother-in-law called my husband crying.
Kyle took all my pension money and disappeared. He hasn't been back in a week. Jane and I are left alone in the house, struggling. Please help us.
My mother-in-law was sobbing on the phone. After calming her down, my husband asked how Kyle had disappeared.
I gave all my pension to Kyle for a startup, but he blew it all on gambling. When I confronted him, he just left.
She desperately explained. As she began to weep uncontrollably and couldn't continue the conversation, the phone was handed over to my sister-in-law.
Can you please call us back? We can't let shit like this. After Kyle failed in his business and sold the house we lived in, my parents disowned us.
My parents disowned us. My dad couldn't forgive us for selling the house. And since then, we've been unable to contact my parents or your mother. My sister-in-law said this, pleading with my husband for help. Hearing their plight, my husband let out a resigned sigh, just as I thought.
It's unfortunate, but don't involve us.
Remember what I said when we left the house? We wouldn't help even if you came crying. To report Kyle's disappearance to the police. It's not our concern, he said, and then hung up the phone. I was surprised, but my husband said it's what they deserve, and I agreed. Afterward, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law repeatedly called my husband's phone. When he finally answered, exasperated, my sister-in-law was crying about not knowing how to file a missing person report. My husband and I were astonished by her lack of knowledge and advised her to call the police. However, just when we thought Kyle might never be found, we heard he was arrested for a bank robbery in another state. Apparently, he did it to pay off his debts. It wasn't his first offense, so a prison sentence seems certain. My sister-in-law, unable to return to her parents' home, is still living with my mother-in-law. It's unclear whether she will divorce Kyle. That's probably the least of her worries right now. She's registered with a temp agency and is working her first job ever, barely making ends meet day by day. My mother-in-law had her entire pension taken by Kyle, and now she has to pay off his debts since he's been arrested. She started working part-time jobs to repay those debts, just like my sister-in-law. My husband and I do feel sympathy for my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. But we've made it clear that we have no intention of helping them and have not been in contact. They're probably experiencing the harshness of the world that my mother-in-law used to talk about. Despite the changes that came with living with my mother-in-law, my husband and I are glad to have returned to our peaceful days.